Hello, Maru. Hello, Paul.
Hello. Oh. So Paul, I don't know if you noticed I asked a question on an issue, but I probably should just ask you directly. When you were implementing support for status sub-resource, I'm pretty sure you didn't, but just to double check, did you add support for installer generation for that status sub-resource as well?
Do you mean the resource that the controller installs?
No.
What did you mean then?
There's kind of two pieces. One is the resource that the controller install, but there's also the hack install.yaml that KubeBuilder generates when you do KubeBuilder create config. And that's kind of I think that's a preferable entry point for installing it. Like the thing that you did kind of makes it easier to, it's more of maybe a testing thing, but when you're actually trying to deploy a controller manager and getting everything installed, the path seems to be a little bit different. So
you might have found a bug, but it should be, the status sub resource should be supported both in like the controller installed CRD, and then if you have it save the resources that it needs to install, it should be in there too. If it's not, then you might have found a bug.
It's a bug. There's kind of two paths, and I would suggest that the install CRDs option for the controller is really a test-only thing. The hack install.yaml that KubeBuilder generates allows you to like round trip. So you can be like kubectl apply install.yaml. You can also do kubectl delete install.yaml, which you can't do with the controller variant. It only will allow you to install things.
Now, I tested it with serializing the crd.yaml, and I know that it works there. Like the tests establish that if you have the status sub-resource annotation on like in the code in the right place, that the generated CRD YAML has the status sub-resource in it. But it might be that whatever serializes install.yaml might use like a slightly different path. So we can look into it. It should be present though. So if it's not, it's a bug.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. I did manage to get local up cluster working to some degree, but then I ran into the fact that local up cluster uses localhost, and when you try to join a cluster that is localhost, that predictably doesn't work. So I guess I probably have, I'm sure local up cluster has a way of specifying an actual IP address or name or something so that it would be like accessible outside of the container. Because if you try to like, hey, let me connect to, you know, the cluster from this pod at localhost, it'll just fail.
Yeah, localhost within a pod is going to be that pod's IP.
Yeah, so it's just a dumb, like, just conflict between like using KubeBuilder, sorry, not using using like local up cluster and trying to join that cluster is just kind of a non-starter unless you name it something that's accessible outside the pod. But, I mean,
Cutting short here, maybe you don't need to spend time with local up cluster. That Kubernetes 10 cluster works with your source directory. So there is an.
Sorry. I'm glad it works for you, but it doesn't work for me. It's very.
No, did you try the other steps, which was like there are two mechanisms, right? Which is you bring up a particular version of K8s, and the other one is using the Kubernetes source. I just posted the link for that using with Kubernetes source.
Right. I've been building it from source. What I'm telling you is that Docker and Docker is very host dependent, and it just happens not to work on my hosts. So if it works for you, awesome, more power to you. You're in a better place than me, but I don't really have a recourse.
Okay.
Have you managed to get the test running then using that? There's a
Yeah,
couple
we were actually in between that. We also ran into that status related problem in the afternoon when we were trying to figure out. So still wrapping our heads around that. So the managed one, which is like integration fixture brought up and the E2E fixture brought up by the test itself, that works fine. The other one that's the task for us is we are still going, but not completed yet. So we are halfway through whatever.
Okay. I have posted kind of rudimentary updates to the deployment. It is a little bit broken, like the deployment script, sorry. And it's kind of, you can manually get it working if you edit the install.yaml, but I'm working as, you probably guessed, on trying to fix the install YAML generation. The trick is just that if, like the way I'm doing it is kind of like I generate it, then I go edit it. But that it just isn't a very seamless experience if you have to create the configuration, manually edit it every time. So if we can get the generation working, then I think we're good to go. If Docker cluster is working for you, maybe I can work with you directly to just verify, like you might have, because you're not going to have this local host issue that I'm having, we might actually be able to make sure that the end-to-end is running on Docker and Docker for you. And I'm happy to coordinate with you after this call on doing that. Sure.
And I'm not sure I did understand it clearly, the issue when you did explain it last time, the issue with the Docker version you were talking about. I and Shashi, both of us actually haven't synced on what Docker versions we are using or not. I remember last I updated was many months ago, maybe 6 months ago or so. And I did update the Docker version to some of the community versions. I mean, they have now enterprise version and community version, right? So
as long as you're using greater than, like, I think 117, I just happen to using like the installed version with CentOS, which is predictably ancient.
Yeah, there is this difference between our, so we are using Ubuntu and you're on CentOS, and the whatever is like packaged with whatever version you are using might be different. Mine is 1.18, 1.18 something.
Yeah, like I said, as long as you're greater than 118, you should have support for multi-stage builds and you won't have a problem. I have my hoops to jump through. I'm glad to hear that you don't have to jump through those hoops because it's not super fun.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it did not give any issues at all, so it really worked.
Okay. So as far as I can tell, that's kind of the stumbling block. Like, I did have one probably more fixed to post, like I haven't repushed, but related to defaulting. The federated type configs that are defined they're not complete because I was assuming defaults. And I'm actually setting the defaults in the federated type config controller before it launches sync controllers. It'll set defaults on the configs, and that seems to work. I can do in-memory controllers against like a cluster, which suggests that we're not seeing control plane conflict or interaction. So the only real thing is just like doing an end-to-end and making sure it works. But I'm pretty confident that like if there's any issues, it's not any conflict with Kube. It's just us getting things installed properly, which is, to me, that's low risk. We just have to go through the motions.
So in terms of like practical things that we need to work through before we can release an alpha, I think we still have the same concerns that we identified last week, right? Like we want folks to test Maru's poll and make sure that the KubeBuilder refactor works correctly with real Kubernetes clusters, right? And then there's also like Maru, you wanted to make sure that Shashi and Irfan were okay with changes that you made to the features that they worked on. And I think also what we're kind of circling right now to like put a really fine point on it, is that we need to understand which Docker versions and like which versions of dependencies you need, right?
I think you need a version of Docker that supports multi-stage builds to be able to build the image. But for a user, I don't think there's any real requirement on Docker version.
Yeah, and I don't think this necessarily is a blocker for us. So we can always have this comment in the in whatever README we are going to update, that this is sort of a prerequisite. And I don't think it's too much of an ask.
Okay. Yeah, the multi-stage build shouldn't be an issue for users, since they should be using tagged versions of images that we build in CI, right?
Okay.
So speaking of that, I'm wondering if you can look at what, like, the way that KubeBuilder builds images and retarget the stable image build to that. Even like using the PR pre-merge, just because, I mean, ideally we have a sense of like what the end user experience would be. And my hope would be, it would be, you know, here's a URL for the install.yaml, because we would commit it. Maybe we'd call it hack install stable, so that you can still generate like one from the source. But then using that would refer to the stable image that we would, you know, build however often. And so you'd be able to just like kube apply URL. I don't know if you can even do that. Maybe you'd have to download it first, but that's my
You can give it a URL. But I mean, if you give it a URL, you're basically like curling a shell script and piping it to the shell, right? It's like a similar degree of YOLO.
Well, as a developer, I mean, you do that pretty pervasively. I'm not suggesting anyone do that on a production cluster, but
yeah,
the tires, do this in a VM and you're pretty safe.
Yeah, and like
Minikube, for example, like if you do this on Minikube, you're going to get something that's already contained.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad pattern. Like I said last week, Istio installation works that way, where you just say, you can do like kube control create -f and then a URL to the Istio install YAML.
So I mean, I get your point. It is kind of a great vector to start infecting clusters, and presumably the clusters have compute capacity, which is desirable for nefarious purposes.
Well, if you don't want to do that, you can just like curl the file and review it yourself before you do anything with it.
Yeah. Anyway, but all that to say, like, is that something we could add to the list of alpha tasks? Is getting a KubeBuilder based image?
I had felt as though that was implicitly in scope, because we need to be able to build, like, we need to make sure that the Canary image build works after the KubeBuilder refactor lands. But yeah, I'm happy to make that explicit.
I just wasn't sure how much work is involved. I mean, it's just simply a Docker build this Docker file in terms of like what's happening in the deploy script. I'm assuming it's as simple when you're pushing to the same location you'd push the API server builder image.
Yeah. I think it will be a pretty simple change.
Okay.
In fact, like I'd be happy to start looking at that change if you think that the pull is ready enough.
I think modulo, I think there's one change I have to commit that just fixes a problem with the controller manager. But then I would say, yeah, if you were to like base a patch on this PR, you should be able to build an image that is usable.
Okay.
Irfan, do you have time this afternoon, or maybe we could coordinate for your next day if that's more convenient to work with, just to make sure that you could reproduce a working unmanaged cluster with your Docker and Docker setup?
Yeah, I would prefer we sync up tomorrow.
Okay. Want
In
to set a
fact,
time? I could probably stay up late enough to coordinate with your morning, depending on how early it is.
no, I mean to say tomorrow means I think the best time for us to sync would be like your early morning, because my day is generally later in the evening and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't you? Is it like how early do you want to meet? I mean, I guess I could do legwork beforehand and make sure we have everything ready, and then if you could just get it working, great. And if you can't, then I'd like to work with you so we can just speed it along. Because tomorrow is actually
Yeah,
the last
I
day of the
also wanted that way. Like, let me try it for a day. Maybe I
Okay.
can just get it working on my own. In
Okay.
case it doesn't work, then we can sync up tomorrow. So as early as like I think you generally do early mornings. So 8 or 9 in the morning is perfectly fine for me. That will give us a
Okay.
couple of hours before the next tomorrow's meeting also.
So I'll suggest that if you get it working, like if I manage to get things in a state where you can just reproduce it, great. If not, send me a meeting invite for 8 a.m. and otherwise I'll see you at the 10:30 meeting.
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just trying to get like things in a shape where I'm not blocking because I'm going to be off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So today and tomorrow is it for me this week, and I want to make sure that you guys can move forward without me.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we want to talk about?
I have one quick thing to mention, and this is for you, Shashi.
Yeah.
When I was initially, I was trying to make sure that the group for the multi-cluster resource or multi-cluster DNS resource was multiclusterdns.kates.io. KubeBuilder was giving me a lot of trouble. Like I tried like manually fixing it, and it just there's enough disjoint. It really expects that a given project has a single domain, and so as of now it's multiclusterdns.federation.kates.io. I would expect that at some point you'd want to change that and have it be an external thing managed as a separate project, just because it could be used separate from Federation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to make sure you're clear that like that's the state of things today.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I just saw those changes you did today. Yeah, those few issues I also faced. I think most of you already solved it, right? And I think the path is mainly the control manager running a standalone, like in unmanaged cluster, right? So
Yeah.
I think I think it is still to be verified that the Docker file and the how do we start that ack install.yaml, right? So I'm actually facing few issues with. So once I install Federation, I join the cluster, but the cluster is never going to a ready state.
So the nature of that, like you're using the install.yaml approach?
Yeah.
Like, okay. So the problem is like, I mean, if you look at the commit history, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there is a commit that says, oh, I'm in the wrong branch, sorry. There we go.
There is a manual update on the install.yaml that I have seen.
Yeah. So the catch is if you run the deploy script, it'll regenerate the install.yaml and overwrite that, and so you kind of have to reapply it. The symptom that you'll notice is any resource that uses status, which includes cluster, which is like a blocker, if it doesn't have the status sub-resource defined in the CRD, any attempt to update the status will fail, and therefore the cluster will never become ready.
Yeah, okay.
But like I said, you can, if you want to manually fix that until I actually fix the generation, you can look at that commit that Irfan mentioned and just apply it manually, and it should work.
Okay, okay, yeah, yeah, will do.
And
And
there's
yeah,
sorry, go
Madhu,
ahead.
looks like the cluster registry version which we are using, right, is 006. I
Yeah.
think that uses a certain Kube builder, and if you look at 1.11, the CRD status has a few optional fields introduced in 1.11, right? That's where this validation is failing for us, right? When you install a CRD.
You're seeing validation failures?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
you have skipped those validations as of now, Maru, right? In the
Yeah,
deploy script and
because
all.
it's not just like validation from Cube Builder is just failing Cube 111. Like it was fine in 110, and so for now, I say just skip it. It's basically harmless for our purposes. I mean, there's consequences to including fields in a CRD which aren't compatible with sub-resources, but we're not doing that. So the extra fields are just they're fine. Cube is just being really restrictive. And there's actually I communicated that to the person who's working on CRD sub-resources, and she's going to try to reduce, like to increase the number of fields that are safe to use. So for now, skipping validation is effectively safe. So.
Okay, okay. Okay.
And I guess this also pointed to one more stuff. So what we are vendoring as of now in the PR that you have is Cube build. No, it's Cube Builder 1.10. Which one is that? 1.10, 1.11. I think
Not
it's
the right version.
1.11.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and similar. So there is this the CRD definitions are in API extensions, API server, and that version also is pretty old. Like it's 1.10, whereas it should be coherent with the API server release or that KTS release, which is a newer version.
Yeah.
That is the reason
I
we
mean,
are seeing this skew.
right. Yeah, I'm to be honest, I'm not too worried about that at the moment because
Mm-hmm.
we can work around it, but I do think before alpha we'll want to have the newest version. I'm just kind of like, I mean, moving to a different version and worrying about the consequences is something I'd rather do once this PR merges.
Okay.
Or maybe, I
Yeah,
don't know,
+1.
it'll just depend on how complicated it is to fix the generation for the install.yaml. Like my temptation is to just work on the vendored version to get it right and then push it up to Cube and then a Cube builder and then bring it back down. Just because I think it'll be faster. But I definitely agree that your concern is completely valid. I think we do want to stabilize on the most recent version and make sure that, yeah, we're not behind.
Yeah. And,
Yeah,
Paul,
let's do the version bump of QBuilder as a separate poll. I worry about this poll being like so large that it will never get merged. So let's do that.
no.
Yeah.
We're close.
Yeah,
I swear we're close. We better be because I'm going to go crazy if it doesn't merge soon.
So I've got to drop at the hour, folks. Just FYI.
Okay. Just before you drop, Paul, so you would be following up about the issue where the generation of install.yaml has to be corrected, right? That's not.
Yeah, I
being
introduced
correctly done as
that
of now.
feature, so I feel a need to make sure that it works.
I'm
Okay,
looking
yeah.
at it. It's kind of a separate path. It's looking at, like it doesn't actually read the types. So like everything you've done is completely fine. It's just like there's another path past that just isn't implemented yet. So
Gotcha.
if you have time to prioritize that, then maybe I shouldn't work on it. But to me, this is like a blocker that needs to be done before we can have an install working. I'm happy to continue working on it. What would you prefer?
why don't you continue working on it? I have like an ask for another project that I have to concentrate on like probably the next couple days. So if
Okay.
you wanna continue working on it, that's totally cool with me, and I can do a code review when you're ready.
Okay. I mean, my goal is just to get something working, and then in terms of pushing it back up to QBuilder and vendoring it back down, maybe that's something, if I don't get to it, that you can take over.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I see Ivan also on the call. Ivan, this guy, Guy Liu, I don't know his real name, what it is. He raised one PR to have Cube FNOD unjoined. That seems useful. You can probably review that also.
Yeah, but
I'm going to suggest we don't merge anything, frankly.
yeah, I
don't
think
want-
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not much. I said it's useful. So
Yeah,
maybe if there is
I
any,
agree.
yeah.
My only comment is, go ahead,
it's
sorry.
based on the aggregated API, right? I think it might not be so useful in the intermediate term, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so if there are some point, I didn't actually have a look at it at all, except for the title. So yeah, I mean, if it is based on aggregated, then it's not useful at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it probably is, and probably has older versions of cluster registry that it's potentially using also. This is kind of my first day back after being out on PTO for a couple weeks. So I'm going to be kind of looking, I'll probably spend time looking at that eventually, but prioritizing the PR that Maru has up right now.
Sure,
Taking
sure.
a look at that.
Yep.
I've reached out to him offline and just suggested that he start attending SIG meetings and start like
I
participating.
think most
directly.
probably his place, I think, is in China. I believe it is 2 midnight for him, I believe.
Uh-huh. Well,
I
I
think.
just think that like contributing only via GitHub is problematic because he doesn't really have a lot of background on what we're doing and why. And so the work he's prioritizing and the issues he's raising in some ways are just out of sync with what we're doing. And to me, it's more of at this point, it's more of a distraction as we move to alpha to have to answer his questions and try to help him. And it's like, but he just doesn't, he's just disconnected. So I want to find a way. He seems really eager and he seems like he's really capable, but we need to figure out a way to align him to what we're trying to do.
Agree.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm around and like happy to spend time if either you, Irfan, or Shashi like questions or need help or anything. Like I want to make sure that you're not blocked while I can still unblock you.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. See you guys.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
See you
Thank
tomorrow.
you. Bye.